She wasn't on the manifest as crew. She wasn't supposed to be near the cockpit. She was just the woman sweeping the aisle. Until the captain collapsed, and she walked into the flight deck like she'd never left. Welcome to the Scape, where the quiet ones often carry the loudest pasts, and where even a mop in hand can hide the hand of a pilot. Tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. At Gate 17B, everything moved on schedule. Passengers shuffled in with earbuds already in place, pulling carry-ons with one hand and clutching overpriced coffee with the other. Flight 982 to Seattle wasn't full, but it was full enough for the usual chaos. A crying toddler, an aisle seat squabble, a last-minute gate change that no one wanted to acknowledge. And somewhere in that noise, a woman in a navy blue janitorial uniform moved with calm precision. No one looked at her. They rarely did. She wasn't tall. Her hair was tied back in a plain bun. She wore black sneakers, latex gloves, and carried a spray bottle in one hand, a folded cleaning rag in the other. No badge, no name tag, just a small laminated security pass clipped to her waist. Most assumed she was part of the ground crew, maybe contracted by the cleaning services company that rotated people in and out of dozens of terminals every day. She didn't mind being invisible. Not anymore. Her name wasn't printed anywhere passengers could see, but it used to be. And in a different lifetime, it had been stitched in gold above the left breast pocket of a flight suit. Sarah Donovan, Major USAF, Ret. The plane had already gone through primary checks. The pilots were on board. The air attendants were reviewing emergency protocols. And yet, when Sarah moved through the cabin, she ran her fingers lightly under the edges of seat rows. She knew where switches lived, even in a commercial shell. She tapped the oxygen panel latch once on the left side, loose but functional. Her eyes briefly paused on the cabin intercom. Old wiring, probably analog backup in case of full digital failure. Her brain still registered things like that automatically. Muscle memory never really dies. She checked the aft lavatory, sprayed down the sink, folded 2 paper towels with perfect military symmetry, and turned the lock handle to vacant with an efficiency no one noticed. Her shift was over, and that's when she got the call. "Hey, Donovan!" Her supervisor's voice crackled through the walkie clipped to her hip. "Flight 982 just lost a member of the cleaning team. They need someone to ride out with the plane and do post-arrival cleanup in Seattle. Overtime approved. You good?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Yeah, I'm good." She took the last rear jump seat. No announcements, no one greeted her by name. She strapped in silently, one row behind the galley curtain. The engines hummed, the final boarding call echoed through the fuselage, and no one, not even the captain, realized that somewhere near the tail of the plane, a woman who once flew combat sorties through sandstorms in zero visibility was now sitting with her hands folded, eyes closed, and senses scanning the aircraft like she had a radar in her bones. Up front, Captain Reynolds had flown this route 100 times, maybe 200. He was steady, sharp, and barely a year from retirement. His first officer, Mitchell, was younger but solid, the kind who followed checklists and double-confirmed coordinates without hesitation. They cleared taxi and accelerated. Sarah felt the familiar pitch of ascent, the subtle dip of weight in her spine, the shudder that always came around 10,000 feet. She didn't move, didn't breathe differently, but her hands twitched once against her thighs. She had felt something, just a second of delay, not turbulence, not drag, something deeper, mechanical, like a thread being pulled.
She sat up straighter and glanced left toward the cabin wall where wires ran just behind the metal paneling. The plane climbed toward 31,000 feet. That's when she heard it. A tone, not the usual chime, a pitch only trained ears might notice, followed by a silence so unnatural it became the loudest thing in the plane. First Officer Mitchell didn't see it coming. One moment, Captain Reynolds was adjusting altitude trim and reviewing their mid-flight handoff to Canadian ATC. The next, his hand froze mid-air, fingers twitching, breath shallow, before he slumped forward, forehead thudding against the yoke with a muffled thump. At first, Mitchell thought Reynolds had dropped something. He turned, casually, still mid-sentence.
"Hey, you got—" But then he saw the man's face. Ashen. Eyes wide but unfocused. Jaw slack. "Captain?" he said, sharp now. "Captain!" Reynolds didn't respond. Mitchell's hand shot to the intercom. "Flight deck to lead FA. I need medical assistance up front, now." But something was wrong. The button wasn't responding. Neither was the comm panel. Screens flickered. Not enough to signal full failure, but enough to trigger a seasoned pilot's nerves. The altimeter blinked. The autopilot indicator briefly turned amber, then steadied again in green. That wasn't supposed to happen. And worse, the backup channel was silent too. Mitchell pulled the oxygen mask to the captain's face and tried to revive him with manual stimulation. No response. He was breathing, shallow and slow, but unconscious. The aircraft was stable, for now, but Mitchell was effectively flying blind. Back in the cabin, Sarah was already unbuckling. She hadn't heard the intercom chime, but she had seen the lights shift, half a second delay between rows, a staggered flicker across the overheads. Commercial jets aren't supposed to do that. And then came the silence again. That wrong silence. She rose from her seat. A few passengers glanced at her, confused. She was in uniform, technically, but no one stopped her as she moved with purpose down the aisle, eyes scanning the interior like she was reading an invisible checklist only she could see. When she reached the forward galley, she paused. There was a sound she hadn't heard in a decade. The cockpit door, electronically controlled, had defaulted to unlocked. Fail-safe status. It had only one cause. Both pilots were incapacitated, or the system detected a threat that overrode cockpit lockdown. She stepped forward and opened the door. Mitchell's head whipped around. "Ma'am, get out! This is a secure—" Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm not here to sit." Mitchell froze, recognition dawning in his eyes. Not of her name, but of the way she stood. Calm. Squared stance. Eyes scanning the dash like she'd seen it before. Because she had. "Captain's out," he said. "Systems are stable, but the comms are unresponsive, and we've got intermittent flicker on nav assist. I've sent a mayday through the satellite uplink, but haven't received confirmation."
Sarah nodded once. "Redundancy is lagging. You're not getting confirmation because it's bouncing between proxies. You're flying blind, but the aircraft thinks it's stable. You'll get a false safe loop unless you intervene." Mitchell blinked. "How do you—" She moved past him and eased into the captain's seat. Her hands slid onto the controls with a fluidity that wasn't rehearsed. It was embedded. Her fingers tapped the same rhythm they had once used in combat cockpits, a series of silent checks that didn't require screens, just feel. Mitchell stared. "Who are you?" She kept her eyes forward. "No one that matters. Right now, I just need to keep us level." He hesitated, then nodded. And just like that, the cockpit had a new captain. Mitchell kept glancing sideways, as if expecting Sarah to reveal a badge, a license, anything. But she offered nothing. No explanation, no ID. Just firm, quiet control. Outside the cockpit windows, clouds stretched in silent, layered blankets as the aircraft held its course at 36,000 feet. But inside the flight deck, the tension was thick. Systems that should have been seamless were lagging by milliseconds. just enough to feel unnatural. Sarah moved fast, scanning each panel like she'd rehearsed it in 1,000 sims, because once upon a time she had. She rerouted auxiliary power, verified manual backup controls, and performed a silent override of the glide slope systems, all without asking permission. Mitchell, now a co-pilot in more ways than one, simply watched. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You ex-military?" Her answer came without pause. "Used to be." "What branch?" "A beat." "Doesn't matter." "You flew?" "Another beat." "Flew, tested, trained, then disappeared." Mitchell's brow furrowed. "Disappeared?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Some people serve. Some get erased." A long moment passed between them. Mitchell looked back at the unconscious captain, then at Sarah again. He knew protocol. He knew what would happen if he reported an unidentified civilian in the cockpit, especially one actively flying the aircraft. But instinct overrode rulebooks, and there was something about the way she touched the yoke, like it still recognized her. "What do I call you?" he asked finally. "Call me Lane."
Is that your real name? She didn't answer. Meanwhile, in the cabin, a passenger with a Bluetooth headset finally noticed the delay in in-flight entertainment and called over a flight attendant. He pointed to the frozen screen and said, "Is something wrong with the plane?" She smiled. Trained, professional. "No, sir, just a small connection issue." But even she felt it. The quiet hum beneath her shoes wasn't quite right. There was a delay between throttle response and cabin pressure balance. Subtle, not dangerous, but off. Behind the scenes, the aircraft's AI-assisted systems had begun redirecting core functions. This wasn't a failure. This was a correction. Something or someone had entered legacy override mode. Back in the cockpit, Sarah tapped into a menu most pilots didn't even know existed. She bypassed the standard interface and reached into the old framework, the bones of the aircraft, where her past lived in coded silence. "Wait," Mitchell said suddenly, pointing. "That layer of the nav system was decommissioned 5 years ago." "Not in mine," Sarah said softly. "You've flown this model?" She nodded. "Before it was even on paper. This cockpit, this layout, was born in a hangar in Nevada. I helped write its language." Mitchell leaned back. "You were a test pilot?" Sarah didn't look away from the console. "No, I was the benchmark they built the tests around." Outside, turbulence began to ripple through the clouds. Nothing major, but enough to rock the aircraft gently. The intercom clicked, dead again. Sarah reached up, pulled the circuit, flipped a bypass switch, and pressed transmit. "This is temporary captain of Flight 982. We are rerouting control through manual redundancy. There is no cause for alarm. Please remain seated. We'll be stabilizing shortly." It wasn't official, but it was enough. And somehow, her voice was the only one the aircraft would still listen to. It started with a subtle tone, inaudible to the untrained ear, but Sarah caught it instantly. A low-frequency pulse, originating from the aircraft's auxiliary computer core. Not the public-facing navigation software, not even the backup autopilot layer. This signal came from deeper, what engineers once called the phantom root, a legacy architecture designed only for initial flight modeling and testing before being locked out in commercial rollouts.
Except this one wasn't locked out. It was awake. Sarah sat upright in the pilot's seat. Her fingers danced over the touchscreen, bypassing layer after layer of security prompts, not by brute force, but through fluency. She wasn't hacking the system. She was speaking its first language, a language she helped write. Mitchell, seated beside her, watched with growing awe. He'd flown for nearly a decade. He knew every safety protocol, every emergency checklist, every redundancy fallback sequence. But what he saw now wasn't protocol.
It was improvisation born from intimacy with the aircraft's soul. "You're not just a test pilot. You built this." Sarah didn't answer directly. She was too focused. With one final tap, the screens realigned. The flicker stopped. The voltage calibration normalized. The faint hum in the cockpit evened out. System override complete. Legacy command recognized. Lane 001. 10 years ago, the aerospace branch of the Air Force ran a covert program, Spectre Flight Integration. It aimed to merge experienced pilots with semi-autonomous aircraft systems for enhanced neural response time and mid-air adaptability. Sarah Lane had been the cornerstone of that program, the neural baseline by which all other pilots were measured. But during a high-altitude weapons test over the Indian Ocean, one of the prototypes, Spectre 4, made a decision without pilot input. It rerouted itself mid-maneuver, resulting in a loss of control. No lives were lost, but it was enough to shut down the entire program. The military brass, terrified of AI overreach and public backlash, buried everything. Sarah was discharged under non-disciplinary administrative removal. In reality, she was erased. No press, no retirement ceremony, no service record access, just silence. She became invisible. And that's how she ended up scrubbing coffee stains off tray tables on Flight 982. Now the aircraft knew her. Somewhere beneath the layers of commercial-grade code and flight logic, it recognized the fingerprints of its creator. It yielded, not because it had failed, but because she had returned. "Stabilizers are synced," Mitchell said, eyes flicking across the now stable readings.
"Communications are cycling. We're broadcasting again." Sarah nodded. "Maintain current heading. Don't adjust for wind drift. The system's still recalibrating to my inputs." He frowned. "How are we going to explain this?" "We're not," she said flatly. "We land. Everyone walks off. No press, no statements, no heroics." "But this changes things. They'll trace this. They'll know you were here." "Let them." In the cabin, a new kind of silence settled. Not panic, but an eerie calm. Passengers looked to the flight attendants, who offered tense, practiced smiles. Some sensed that something wasn't quite right. A few murmured about the delay in updates, but no one screamed, no one rioted. Somehow, even without knowing, they could feel that someone was flying the plane, someone who knew it better than anyone else. Mitchell glanced sideways again. "Why didn't you ever come back?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Because I wasn't supposed to. The project failed. I was the face of that failure. They didn't need a scapegoat. They needed silence. And you just disappeared into airport maintenance?" It was easier. No questions, no eyes, just me, a mop, and a rotating list of gates. Every now and then, I'd see one of the old planes pass through. Some of them still had traces of Spectre code, buried so deep even the tech teams didn't know it was there. Mitchell leaned back, exhaling. "You ever think they knew? That they wanted to bury you where you'd be close, just in case?" Sarah looked at him, expression unreadable. "Maybe. Or maybe I was just too stubborn to leave the sky behind." A final chime sounded. The autopilot re-engaged, not by force, but by consent. Sarah had manually restored its systems, then stepped back, allowing the current pilot, Mitchell, to resume full control. The aircraft's AI had accepted her as operator, performed the self-checks it couldn't do without her, and now handed over the wheel. Flight path confirmed. We're clear through to Seattle.
Descent in 23 minutes. Sarah stood up slowly. Then I'll go back to the rear galley. By the time we land, no one will remember who sat in this chair. He reached out. You saved us. You saved me. People need to know. But she shook her head. People need to land safely. That's all.
And then she was gone, just like she'd never been there at all. By the time Sarah returned to the cabin, the aircraft had settled into a smooth, effortless glide. The flickering lights had stopped. The strange pitch that had set her instincts on fire was gone. Everything looked, and more importantly felt, like a normal commercial flight again. Passengers were sipping drinks, checking their phones, dozing in their seats. A few gave her puzzled glances as she walked back down the aisle, but no one said anything. Just a janitor, just the woman in blue with gloves tucked into her belt and a worn expression that said she'd had a long day. No one knew what she'd just done, that she had just spoken to a machine older than they realized, and that the machine had remembered her. She sat back down in her jump seat at the rear of the aircraft, folded her arms, let out a breath. She didn't need applause, didn't want it. Applause was for stories that ended in medals or news headlines. Hers never did. Hers always ended in silence. The Spectre systems were never supposed to exist in commercial planes, but technology doesn't just disappear. It gets repackaged, rebranded. The bones of that old test program, the instincts, the logic trees, the neural prioritization algorithms, they had made it into the flight control DNA of several long-range jets. The company said they'd removed it. The military signed off. But Sarah knew better. You don't remove roots that deep. You bury them. And sometimes they remember, especially when the right voice calls them back. In the cockpit, Mitchell sat in stunned quiet. He had the plane again. The readings were stable. Flight control had reconnected through a different channel and confirmed they were clear to descend. He'd been vague about the earlier disruptions, calling it a brief systems desync, and no one pushed for more. But one thing still lingered in his mind. That tattoo. He hadn't noticed it right away, not until Sarah had reached above her head to trigger the manual reset on the comm relay. The right sleeve of her janitor uniform had pulled back slightly, just enough to reveal a fragment of ink. Wings. Not the decorative kind, the kind worn by Air Force pilots. And below it, faint but unmistakable, a numeric designation.
Spectre 1. Mitchell knew that name. Old pilots whispered about it. It had been scrubbed from flight rosters, redacted from logs, but it still lived in training folklore. The woman who could feel turbulence before the instruments, who once landed a bird blind in a sandstorm when all systems failed. The one they called the Phantom Pilot. He had just flown with her. And now, she was scrubbing seatbacks and wiping down plastic trays for minimum wage. 23 minutes later, Flight 982 landed without incident. Smooth, precise, uneventful. The captain was still unconscious, but stable, transported off the plane quietly with little fanfare. The passengers were told he'd suffered a brief fainting episode and was under observation. Most shrugged it off. Some even applauded the safe landing, none the wiser to what had nearly happened. Sarah stayed behind as everyone disembarked. She picked up a lost neck pillow from under a seat, straightened the safety cards in the seat backs, gathered empty water bottles with her gloved hands. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, the last one off, just another worker doing cleanup. Until Mitchell approached her. He didn't say her name. He didn't salute. He just stood there, holding something. Her gloves. "You left these," he said. She took them, nodded. "Thanks." Mitchell hesitated, then said quietly, "If you ever want to fly again, not like that, I mean, officially, I know people, good people." She looked up at him, eyes unreadable. Flying was never the problem. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." Then she turned, walked down the jet bridge, and vanished into the hum of airport noise. And just like that, the ghost pilot was gone again. The airport was alive with its usual chaos. Families rushing to gates, suitcases trailing like forgotten thoughts, overhead announcements echoing into oblivion. But in a far corner, tucked between a staff corridor and a forgotten vending machine, Sarah sat alone on a maintenance bench. Her uniform jacket was off. The sweat along her collarbone had dried. In her hands, she held a small black case, unmarked, about the size of a lunchbox. Inside was the one piece of her past she never gave up. Not her wings, not her medals, not even her name.
Just a hard copy schematic, a laminated blueprint of the Spectre 1 interface from the first prototype days. Faded with age, edges cracked, the kind of thing no one would ever suspect mattered. But to her, it was the reminder that once she had been trusted to rewrite the way humanity touched the sky. Now she was invisible. The airline never filed a report about her intervention. Mitchell didn't name her. The flight log recorded a co-pilot assisted landing due to incapacitated captain, a standard line used more often than the public knew. The captain recovered, but didn't remember the moment he blacked out. No news outlet ever mentioned the glitch in the core AI. No tech team traced the override. As far as the world was concerned, nothing had happened. But Mitchell kept thinking about her, about the way she moved, not flashy, not proud, just precise. He spent a week trying to dig into Spectre 1, found almost nothing. The records were locked down beyond clearance. The name Lane brought up 0 matches. It was like she truly didn't exist. And yet, his hands still remembered the way the yoke steadied once she touched it, like the aircraft had remembered her too. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to her shifts. Different flight, different city, same tools, same silence. But something had changed, not outside, but inside. Because while the world chose to forget her, the sky didn't. Every jet engine that roared overhead carried echoes of a code she had once written. Every control panel bore the logic tree she had helped build. Every landing, every takeoff, every breathless moment of turbulence, somewhere in the heart of it all, she was there. Not seen, but felt. One afternoon, weeks later, while cleaning a jet bridge before boarding began, a young mechanic passed her. He glanced at her ID tag, then at her face. "He ever fly before?" he asked casually, noticing the quiet confidence in her stance. She smiled faintly. "Once," she replied, "a long time ago." He chuckled and walked off, but for a brief second, her hand hovered over the railing, like she could feel the vibration of turbines through the concrete, like the sky was whispering to her again. And she let it, not as a pilot, not as a hero, but as a keeper of silence, a silence that had once saved 211 lives at 36,000 feet and left no trace behind.